always a sense that you could follow the Duke of Edinburgh's jobs because you never quite knew what would happen. Effectively, we did used to call it, being on Philip watch. So who's going to be on Philip watch? Somebody had to always cover him because you knew you might get something really good for copy. I used to observe him on jobs and he'd have his hands behind his back, sort of almost pecking away at people, trying to get to the bottom of what they might want to say. He just kind of kept calm and got on with it and was very much his own man. Well, I started royal reporting in 2005, and in that time I did do a number of jobs with Prince Philip. On jobs, really, he would kind of pretend that the press wasn't there and just get on with it. I mean, I don't think it's any secret to suggest that he found the press a little bit of an irritation. Something quite nice, really, about a member of the royal family just not really caring what anyone thought of him, which I think quite emboldening when you consider all of the P's and Q's that have to be followed normally when you're covering a royal job. So there's always a sense that you could follow the Duke of Edinburgh's jobs because you never quite knew what would happen. I remember there was one incident during a tour of Malta, and we went to a church and there were a group of people standing around waiting to meet him and the Queen, and he came in and started chatting to them while the Queen was on the other side of the room. And there was a guy there with a beard, and he just turned around to this guy and he said, "Don't you think you should have shaved for the Queen?" And this guy kind of looked quite startled, and then they both started laughing. And I realised that a lot of these quips, and we can appreciate that he was a man of his time, but at the same time there was a sense that he wanted to put people at ease. Often when people are waiting to meet the Queen, of all people, they're standing like a rabbit in headlights and they don't know what to think or do or say. And so he was there really as the warm-up act. That was his role. I used to observe him on jobs and he'd have his hands behind his back, sort of almost pecking away at people. Not in an aggressive way, but just in a kind of trying to get to the bottom of what they might want to say. I think he resented the press for following him around and looking for him to make a gaffe in his later years. I think that really irritated him. But actually it wasn't as much gaffes that we were looking for as just throwaway remarks. On another occasion, we were in Germany and he started chatting to this pair of doctors and they were talking about, their work in Germany, and he basically sort of turned around and said, "Doctors, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them," or something similar, never believe a word they say. And that was, again, very characteristic. He just kind of kept calm and got on with it and was very much his own man. And you saw that on engagements all the time, this idea that he didn't mind having a conversation. I think in order to completely alleviate the boredom of small talk, he would ask challenging questions of people, and people might say something and then he'd say something completely counter to what they were saying, almost playing devil's advocate, just to strike up a conversation.
Good morning.
We went to America with the Queen and the Duke when George W. Bush was president, and George W., kept on making gaffes and faux pas.
You helped our nation celebrate its bicentennial in 1976.
I suppose the great thing about the Duke of Edinburgh is you could kind of read the mood music by just looking at him. You could just take a look at the Duke of Edinburgh to just see how he was processing events. And of course, he always remained completely upright and professional, but there's always a sense, you could sometimes sense a slight amount of sort of bemusement and bewilderment on his face if things went wrong. So that's always been quite interesting. Effectively, we did used to call it, being on Philip watch. So who's going to be on Philip watch? Somebody had to always cover him because you knew you might get something really good for copy. You look at his long-serving staff, and many of them were working for him for sort of 50, 60 years. In fact, of course, he outlived many of his closest aides. I think his long-standing staff are a testament to him, really. There wasn't a large staff turnover because he got on well with people behind palace gates, and equally, I suppose, understood personally, firsthand, the importance of deference. I mean, he spent his whole life deferring to the Queen, and therefore he wasn't going to be the kind of person who treated staff badly. He did have a very human side as well, Prince Philip. I remember being at the Queen's Golden Jubilee in Windsor, and there was a child there with a banner or a poster or some flowers who couldn't get to the Queen. And he was quite an old man by that point still, but he leaned down and lifted this child up so they could reach. And I sort of thought, my goodness, that was sometimes lost in some of the coverage, the fact that he was very doting and hands-on particularly for their era. The other thing about him, he didn't really want people to be standing on ceremony. I mean, that explains why he was quite relaxed with people on jobs and just tried to get everyone to calm down. So on one hand, you get this image of somebody who seems to be quite sort of opinionated and difficult, but on the other, not really with much ego at all, just thinking, well, I've come here, I've done my bit, but it doesn't really matter what my legacy is, I've just done my best in life, which I think is quite extraordinary, isn't it? These days you expect people in high profile positions of privilege and power, it's all about them and they're quite self-centered and me. And I think that people would recognize that the Duke of Edinburgh was rather the antithesis of that kind of, show busy attitude. I think the royal scene will be less colourful without him there. It's difficult to envisage major royal events with the Queen by herself. I think we can all safely conclude that there will never be another royal quite like Prince Philip.